A decorated army colonel, the remains of a fallen soldier, and a flight he was denied. What happened next sent shockwaves across the nation. The airport was a microcosm of travel chaos. Families dragging rolling suitcases, business travelers absorbed by their smartphones, and children dashing ahead of exhausted parents in the midst of the usual clamor and commotion. Yet, on this fateful day, the scene took on an altogether different tone. As Colonel David Carter stepped through the entrance wearing his polished dress shoes, each measured click resonating on the cool, hard tiled floor. He had experienced this routine countless times before, but today something felt profoundly different. The heaviness on his chest was not simply due to the ribbons and medals adorning his uniform. It was compounded by the weight of a casket waiting on the tarmac, draped solemnly in the American flag. Inside that casket lay the remains of Private First Class Jason Reynolds, a young soldier, only 21 years old, who had been taken from his family far too soon. Colonel Carter paused, adjusted his hat with a measured precision that had come from years of military discipline, and took a deep, steadying breath. He knew that the duty ahead transcended personal recognition or rank. It was about fulfilling the promise that every soldier, no matter how far from home, would be honored. This was not a mission for glory or accolades. It was an obligation, a solemn vow that no one would be left behind. With that conviction burning in his heart, he approached the airline counter. Setting down his meticulously organized military orders and his identification, he faced the woman behind the desk. At first, she barely glanced his way as she began typing something into the computer, a frown creasing her brow. After a moment, she looked up, her eyes hesitating for just a split second too long. "Sir, can I see that again?" she asked, her voice tight and uncertain. Without a hint of impatience, Colonel Carter calmly handed over the papers once more, his gaze fixed on the woman as he noted every subtle detail. The brief flicker of hesitation in her eyes, a sideways glance directed at her co-worker, and the slight shift in her posture, as though she had suddenly found herself in uncharted territory. She turned her head and whispered something to another agent, who in turn glanced over with an expression that was impossible to decipher. The moment seemed to stretch on, thick with tension. A feeling that Carter had encountered before in less formal settings, though he had never grown accustomed to it. When the woman finally returned to his side, her smile was stiff and forced. "I'm sorry, sir, but there appears to be an issue with your ticket. We can't allow you to board at this time." Colonel Carter exhaled slowly, his mind briefly recalling the many challenges he had faced in combat zones, during delicate moments of foreign diplomacy and within the tangled networks of political entanglements. Yet nothing in his long career had prepared him for a situation like this. "I am escorting the remains of a fallen soldier," he replied evenly, tapping the stack of paperwork in front of him. "Everything is in order." The agent, however, did not meet his eyes. Instead, she murmured, "I understand, sir, but there is a security protocol in place that we simply cannot override." "Security protocol," Carter repeated, his voice remaining steady despite the storm of frustration building inside him. "Yes, sir. Security protocol," the agent insisted, forcing a weak smile as if to reassure herself. "It's just policy." He did not move an inch. The word policy hung in the air, vague and unsatisfactory. Behind him, the line of waiting passengers grew longer by the minute. People began to shift restlessly and exchanged murmurs as they observed the unfolding scene. Though he felt the weight of their eyes upon him, Colonel Carter did not step aside. Instead, he squared his shoulders, determined that he would not leave without obtaining a clear answer. Yet the airline staff was resolute in their stance. The air around the counter grew thick with tension as conversations in the waiting area began to quiet. All eyes now fixed on a man in crisp military uniform who was being denied his flight, an image that was rarely seen in such a bustling hub. With an unwavering calm, Colonel Carter addressed the agent once more. "Ma'am, I need to understand exactly what the issue is. This is a military assignment, not a personal trip. My documentation is valid," he stated, his tone measured and firm. At this, the agent hesitated again. Her eyes darted toward a cluster of airline staff gathered near the back of the counter, whispering urgently among themselves. After a brief moment, a supervisor, a man in his mid-50s with a tired expression, stepped forward. He adjusted his name tag, folded his arms and looked directly at Colonel Carter. "Sir, I apologize for the inconvenience, he began, his voice adopting the polished, professional tone often used to end inquiries abruptly. We have certain policies in place, and unfortunately, we cannot override them at this time. That word, policies, rang out like an incantation, its vagueness doing little to quell the rising tide of discontent. Colonel Carter inhaled slowly through his nose, his eyes narrowing slightly as he recalled similar deflections in different settings. I have flown with military escorts on many occasions, he said quietly, his frustration masked by years of disciplined restraint. I know the procedure, and I know that there is no policy that should prevent me from boarding, so, let's be honest. What is the real reason I am being denied? The supervisor cleared his throat, shifting his weight uneasily on his feet. It's just an extra security measure, sir. Nothing personal. Nothing personal, he repeated, with a tone that tried to convey detachment, but instead sounded increasingly absurd. Colonel Carter tightened his jaw, but did not let his anger spill over. He had been in too many rooms where officials hid behind vague explanations, waiting for him to lose his temper so they could call in security. He refused to give them that satisfaction. In the meantime, the people waiting in line began to murmur among themselves. A woman in a striking red blazer leaned toward her husband and whispered, "Do you have an issue with his military clearance?" The comment caught Carter's attention, and he turned his head slightly. A few places behind him, a man in his mid-60s, weathered by years of service and wearing a USMC cap pulled low over his brow, spoke up. "No, sir," the man declared in a firm, authoritative tone. "This isn't about clearance. We simply have to follow standard protocol." The Marine veteran let out a sharp breath, his voice resonating with both incredulity and indignation. "I've been through security 1,000 times, and I've never seen any protocol stop a soldier from escorting one of our own home," he stated, folding his arms across his chest as he continued. "So, what exactly is the issue here?" Murmurs rippled through the line as more passengers began pulling out their phones to record the scene. The shift in the atmosphere was palpable, and even the airline staff behind the counter could sense that something momentous was unfolding. The agent who had originally denied Colonel Carter stole a furtive glance at her supervisor, her eyes betraying uncertainty, as if she were suddenly aware that she had crossed a line. The supervisor sighed, rubbing a hand over his temple, and looked at Carter once again as the weight of the moment settled over everyone present. "Let me check something," he muttered before walking away, leaving the agent to focus intently on her computer screen, as if searching for some miraculous escape clause. Colonel Carter remained rooted to the spot, standing tall with squared shoulders as he stared directly ahead. He was not going anywhere, and he knew that neither was this story. The background murmurs in the terminal had evolved into a focused chorus of voices, and people in line were no longer simply waiting for their flights. They were watching, recording, and engaging with every unfolding second. The Marine who had spoken earlier was not the only person visibly disturbed by the scene. A middle-aged woman dressed in a denim jacket clutched her purse tightly as she shook her head and leaned toward her husband, murmuring, "This isn't right." Nearby, a young man in a hoodie fumbled with his phone, his fingers moving rapidly as he typed out messages, the energy in the room growing ever more dangerous for the airline's reputation. Though his expression remained impassive, inside, Colonel Carter was meticulously noting every detail. The fact that the supervisor had not returned was itself a clue. Either he was scrambling for an excuse or simply waiting for the situation to subside. Neither possibility was reassuring. Then, unexpectedly, a voice emerged from behind him. "Excuse me, sir." Carter turned his head slightly to see a young woman no older than 25 standing just a few feet away with her phone in hand. Her eyes, though uncertain, burned with determination as she spoke in a low voice. I don't mean to intrude, but I just want to make sure I understand. They're not letting you board?" Her careful, deliberate tone drew even more attention from those nearby. Colonel Carter exhaled slowly and glanced at the agent behind the counter before replying, "That's correct." The young woman blinked, seemingly expecting a different answer, then hesitated for a moment before nodding once. She then turned her phone so that its screen faced him. "I'm live right now," she announced clearly, "and people need to see this." In that instant, it was as if the floodgates had opened. Another man in line raised his phone, declaring emphatically, "This is wrong." He shook his head, adding, "This man is literally escorting a fallen soldier." A woman further back raised her voice, waving her hand toward the counter and asking, "Hey, can someone explain why he's being denied?" A few people shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to get involved, but the energy in the room had already shifted dramatically. What began as a series of quiet murmurs had now grown into a full-blown outcry that the airline staff could no longer ignore. The agent at the counter looked as though she wished she could vanish, her hands frozen over the keyboard while her eyes darted nervously toward the many camera lenses capturing the scene. At that moment, the Marine who had spoken earlier stepped forward decisively. "I've seen a lot in my time," he said in a steady yet firm tone, "but I never imagined I'd witness the day when an American soldier, especially one escorting the remains of a brother in arms, would be treated like this." His words resonated powerfully, and the terminal fell into an almost eerie silence. Even the usual announcements over the airport loudspeakers seemed distant and muted, drowned out by the relentless beeping of recording devices capturing every moment. The Marine squared his broad shoulders and continued, "This is a disgrace." The agent swallowed hard, her fingers trembling as she clicked nervously on her keyboard. The supervisor was still nowhere to be seen. Passengers began to whisper among themselves. Even a baby fussing in its stroller could not distract the mother, who instead fixated on her phone with a look of disgust. Then, from somewhere in the back of the line, a man muttered, "It's already trending." Colonel Carter did not move an inch. He had learned not to celebrate prematurely, yet the way the agent behind the counter stiffened spoke volumes. She too recognized the gravity of the moment. The woman in the denim jacket checked her phone and gasped, whispering to her husband, "Oh my God, it's already on Facebook." The older Marine grunted as he pulled out his own phone, remarking, "They don't even know what kind of storm they've just started." Almost as if on cue, the airport's loudspeaker crackled to life, announcing, "Attention passengers, due to unforeseen circumstances, Flight 237 to Phoenix will be delayed. We apologize for any inconvenience." A few groans rippled through the crowd, but most people were no longer focused on their upcoming flights. Their attention was entirely riveted on the uniformed soldier being denied his flight while dutifully carrying out his responsibility. Moments later, a young woman near the windows gasped, "He's on Twitter!" She turned her phone screen toward the crowd, and people leaned in to read a tweet written in bold capital letters. They just denied a black army colonel his flight while escorting the remains of a fallen soldier. This is how we treat our heroes. Let him fly. As the numbers began to climb, retweets, comments, likes, it was as if the story were catching fire. Soon, another tweet appeared from a veteran advocacy group. "We are aware of the disgraceful incident at airport name. Our soldiers deserve better. Expect action." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, and it became increasingly clear that the airline had lost control of the narrative. The agent behind the counter, still frozen in place, let out a shaky breath. She abruptly turned and hurried toward the back of the counter, disappearing behind a frosted glass door. It was evident that she was not returning with an answer. She was returning with a plan for damage control. Colonel Carter adjusted his hat once more. He had faced situations like this before, though never at an airport and certainly never like this. But he understood that powerful institutions sometimes discovered too late that they had made the wrong enemy. He did not smile or gloat. This was never about personal triumph. It was about Private First Class Jason Reynolds, the young soldier whose life had been tragically cut short, and the duty to honor him. The atmosphere in the terminal had shifted from one of tense waiting to one of charged expectancy. The people present were no longer merely passive observers. They were actively engaged in what was unfolding. Phones continued to record every moment, and the terminal felt more like an impromptu press conference than a mere airport check-in area. Then, unexpectedly, a man in a dark blue suit with the unmistakable bearing of real authority stepped into the scene. He was not affiliated with the airline, nor was he a member of airport security. He was military. As he approached, people instinctively moved aside. His ID badge flashed briefly as he drew near to Colonel Carter and extended a firm hand. "Colonel," he said in a measured tone, "I am Major Thomas Beckett of the Department of the Army. We have been informed of the situation." Colonel Carter shook his hand with a strength born of long service and unyielding resolve, without needing to question how the major had arrived so swiftly. After all, the military never hesitates to protect its own. Major Beckett then turned his attention to the airline representative, his voice crisp and authoritative. "We are handling this matter now. Colonel Carter, along with the remains of Private First Class Jason Reynolds, will not be flying commercial." The representative blinked, stammering, Sir, we were just about to—" "You were just about to cover your tracks," Major Beckett interrupted, his tone polite yet imbued with unmistakable authority. He glanced from Colonel Carter to the representative before continuing. "Sir, the Pentagon has arranged for a private military flight. Your transport is waiting." A murmur rippled through the assembled crowd as people exchanged incredulous glances. The intervention of the US military had shifted the balance of power decisively. Colonel Carter exhaled slowly, not out of relief, for he did not need rescuing, but because the mission was finally back on track. He gave a small nod of acknowledgement. "Understood," he said quietly. Major Beckett's gaze then flicked toward the airline representative one last time. "This will be addressed," he stated firmly. "This is not a threat, it is a promise." Turning back to the Marine who had observed the entire exchange with quiet satisfaction, Carter said, "I appreciate you, brother." The Marine tipped his head in acknowledgement. "We look out for our own," he replied succinctly. With one final resolute glance at the room, at the passengers who had spoken up, the ones who had refused to let this injustice pass unnoticed, Colonel Carter adjusted his uniform, squared his shoulders, and walked out. He did not head toward the boarding gate. He walked toward something far bigger than the confines of this terminal. For the airline, the fallout was only just beginning. They had assumed that the incident would fade, a few apologies, a press release, maybe even a statement from the CEO, and that damage control would suffice. But the public was not about to let this go. News networks quickly picked up the story, veterans organizations released scathing statements condemning the airline's actions, and politicians weighed in, demanding accountability. Then came the financial blow. By the end of the week, the airline's stock had plummeted, and a trending hashtag calling for a boycott gained significant traction. Customers flooded social media with demands for answers, and before long a lawsuit was filed. A coalition of military advocacy groups formally complained about discrimination and the failure to uphold service member protections. Under immense public pressure, the airline CEO made a public appearance. He described the incident as a regrettable misunderstanding and announced that the employees involved had been placed on administrative leave. Yet by that time, it was too little, too late. Meanwhile, Colonel Carter continued his solemn mission. He escorted the remains of Private First Class Jason Reynolds home, standing silently by as the young soldier's family received him for the last time. He did not seek headlines or crave attention. What he needed, and what every service member deserves, was respect. Respect should never be conditional, nor should it require a viral video or public outrage to be acknowledged. It should be a standard, an unspoken rule that binds a nation together. The people at that airport, the steadfast Marine, and the passengers who refused to remain silent had all proven that when individuals unite in pursuit of justice, wrongdoing has nowhere to hide. If you believe in accountability, if you believe in honoring those who serve, then let your voice be heard. Do not allow silence to enable injustice, for if we remain silent, incidents like this may happen again, and next time, the consequences might be even graver. In the end, what transpired in that crowded terminal was not merely an isolated event. It was a powerful reminder that every soldier, every fallen hero deserves the utmost respect. Colonel Carter's experience that day, fighting against bureaucratic indifference and institutional rigidity, was a testament to the principle that those who serve our country must never be treated as second-class citizens. The dignity and honor of every soldier depend on it. As the story continued to spread across social media and mainstream news outlets, it sparked widespread conversations about the responsibilities of corporations and government agencies to protect the rights of those who have sacrificed so much for their nation. Veterans rallied in support, citizens protested, and policymakers took notice. In every corner of the country, people demanded that respect for our military personnel be reinstated as a core value, one that should never be compromised by outdated protocols or misguided policies. For Colonel Carter, the day had been long and emotionally taxing. The sorrow of escorting a fallen comrade was immense, yet he bore it with the quiet dignity that had defined his career. His mission was clear: to honor the memory of Private First Class Jason Reynolds and to ensure that the sacrifice of every soldier was recognized by those entrusted with their care. His unwavering commitment was a reminder that respect is not something that can be taken for granted. It must be earned, defended, and upheld by every citizen and institution alike. Finally boarding the private military flight arranged by the Pentagon, Colonel Carter's thoughts were with the young soldier and with all those who had given their lives in service to their country. The incident at the airport was but a single chapter in a much larger narrative, a story of sacrifice, duty, and the relentless pursuit of justice. It was a narrative that, once told, could never be forgotten, for it encapsulated the very essence of what it means to serve with honor. In the weeks that followed, the repercussions of that day continued to reverberate across the nation. The airline faced mounting legal challenges, and public opinion turned sharply against it. Congressional hearings were scheduled, and the incident became a catalyst for broader discussions on how military personnel are treated in public spaces and during commercial travel. What began as a single viral tweet evolved into a national outcry, demanding systemic change. In that moment, the collective voice of the people reminded those in power that respect for our service members is an inalienable right. Looking back on the events, one realizes that what transpired was not merely an isolated lapse in protocol, but a profound moment of accountability. The courage of one man, supported by the resolute voices of countless others, forced a reckoning with policies that had long been ignored. Colonel Carter's steadfast determination, combined with the solidarity of everyday citizens, proved that when injustice is met with unity, even the most entrenched systems can be compelled to change. As you reflect on this account, consider what it means to stand up for what is right. Reflect on the sacrifices of every soldier who has ever donned a uniform, and recognize the duty we all share in ensuring that their service is honored with the respect and dignity it so rightly deserves. Let this story serve as a call to action. Speak out, stand together, and demand that accountability be upheld in every facet of our society. For when we allow silence to prevail, we risk permitting injustice to flourish, and that is a cost far too high for any nation to bear. In conclusion, the events at that bustling airport terminal serve as a timeless reminder that respect for our heroes should never be conditional or negotiable. It must be the foundation upon which our communities and our nation are built. As long as there are individuals like Colonel Carter who are willing to stand up, speak out, and insist on accountability, we can rest assured that the sacrifices of our service members will never be diminished or forgotten. May the memory of Private First Class Jason Reynolds and every soldier who has served and sacrificed inspire us all to build a society where no one is made to feel disposable. For the true strength of our nation lies not in the policies we enact or the institutions we create, but in the unwavering commitment of its people to stand up for what is right, even when the cost is high. In that steadfast resolve, we discover the true meaning of honor, a legacy that endures long after the echoes of that fateful day have faded. As this story continues to ripple outward, let it remind us that every voice matters. When we unite against injustice, we not only honor the legacy of those who have given their all for our freedom, but we also ensure that future generations inherit a society in which respect, dignity, and accountability are more than just words. They are the very principles that guide us. May we all commit to safeguarding the rights of those who serve, and may the courage displayed by Colonel Carter and the many others who spoke up at that airport inspire us to never remain silent. For if we allow injustice to go unchallenged today, tomorrow it may come with even graver consequences. And so, as the nation grapples with the fallout from that extraordinary day, let us remember that the fight for justice and respect is an ongoing battle, one that demands the participation of every citizen. Let us honor the memory of every soldier. Let us stand in solidarity with those who have been wronged, and let us ensure that the promise made to every service member that no one is ever left behind remains unbroken, now and always. The story encourages us to stand up for what is right and to demand respect and fairness, especially for those who have made the ultimate sacrifice. No one should be dismissed or treated unfairly due to rigid rules or negligence. When people come together and speak out, their collective voice can drive significant change. The solidarity shown by the community in the story illustrates how united action can force organizations and institutions to address and rectify injustices. While policies and regulations are important, they should never override the basic human values of respect and empathy. Colonel Carter's unwavering commitment to his duty shows that sometimes personal responsibility and the greater good must prevail over inflexible rules. In summary, the story reminds us that regardless of our roles or positions, we all have a duty to uphold human dignity and social justice. It is through collective action and a commitment to accountability that we can ensure the sacrifices of our heroes are always honored and remembered.